So we're in the second session in our marriage series. We started a series last week called Just Married with a Question Mark. And really the thought process here is many people get married, and when they drive off the lot, that first few hours, they've got just married plastered all over their vehicle with an exclamation point. But more often than not, sooner than later, the exclamation point turns to a question mark, and many people look at each other across the dinner table a few years down the road and they say, hey, are we just married? And there's nothing to that marriage. And yet when we discover God's design for marriage, we understand that while it always has its ups and downs and its seasons of difficulty, God's design, because of what it models, is for us to be just married with an exclamation point and to live and breathe marriage through God's lens, not through our human lens. And last week we began with the foundational truth, two main thoughts and principles, that marriage is from God. Marriage is from God. And so God, as the designer, must be the definer of marriage, dictating to us what it is, who it's between, how long it should last, how we should act within it. God, as the designer, is therefore the definer of marriage, and it is up to us to choose to follow and to walk in His plan for our marriages. And if we will, man, we will have, in the midst of even incredible difficulties, an unbelievable wheels-off hip-hop rockin' marriage, even though it can be challenging at times. But if we take the designer's plan and think that we are the designers of marriage, we will then begin to define marriage and what it is not, who it's between and who it's not between. And the problems that flow out of that are numerous. Numerous. We also said last week that not only is marriage from God, but marriage is for God. For God. And this just sheds a whole new light and should be revolutionary perhaps to some people, that my marriage, while I get to experience it and I get to live and breathe it, and I get this opportunity as long as I have breath to serve my wife, and in so doing to serve my Lord, my marriage really isn't for me. My marriage is for Christ and for an opportunity to display to the world the relationship that Jesus Christ has with His bride, the church. And those who are not currently a part of that relationship should be able to look at the men and women who live and breathe marriage from a Christ standpoint and say, wow, they're not perfect. Man, there's something different about that marriage. There's something unique about the way those two people sacrifice and regularly give and lay down their lives for each other. I want that in my marriage, and through it we can be salt and light and show this incredible covenant relationship that Christ has with His church within our marriages. So that was the foundation last week of marriage and the purpose of marriage. So today we roll to the marriage covenant, and we look at exactly what marriage is. How does the Bible, how does God, as the designer, how does He define exactly what marriage is? And if we will allow Him to do that and His Word to do that, and then if we will step into that role and begin to be and walk and live and breathe what God says marriage is, man, what awaits us is nothing short of miraculous. Even though at times marriage is difficult. Married couples, can I get an amen in the house? You know that. We all know that. It is difficult. All right? Real quick, I want to give you three views of marriage today. I'm going to talk about the first one for just a couple of minutes, and then we're going to dive into, look at two, really what I believe to be are the standard thoughts about marriage today, and we're going to show the differences between them and why one is God's view and one is not. But there is a view out there that a few people would hold to. It flows primarily from a Roman Catholic teaching, and that is that marriage is a sacrament. And I won't take time to go into all of the history of that, but as the Roman Catholic Church developed its sacramental theology, it included marriage into one of the sacraments. And their primary teaching on that is grace is given from heaven through the Roman Catholic Church and then dispensed in 7 different veins through the church, one of those veins being marriage. And the teaching is that through the institution of marriage, under the authority of the church, the individuals that come together under the authority of that church are given and shown and continually bonded in sacramental grace. Grace that is saving, sanctifying, and divine grace. And while we understand, those of us that are married, man, it requires a lot of grace towards each other to be married and to stay married, the biblical teaching is not that saving grace is dispensed through the institution of marriage. Marriage, according to the Scriptures, one of the benefits and one of the designs of marriage is that we, through marriage, have the ability to produce new physical life. And that's a miracle. But the Bible never teaches that through marriage that it is the mechanism or avenue to attain spiritual life. And so that's why I would draw some distinctions. While there is a sacramental bond that takes place, a sacred bond between a man and a wife through marriage, I do not believe that the data of biblical teaching and scriptural support lends itself to the teaching that saving grace comes through marriage. That saving grace is found in Jesus Christ alone. So we would probably draw a little bit of lines of distinction. Now the Bible does teach that through our marriages we should sanctify each other. In other words, I should become more of a follower of Christ because of Lillian's influence in me. But especially, according to Ephesians 5, Lillian should be drawn closer to walk with Christ as a result of my leadership in the home and my helping to sanctify her the way Christ sanctifies the church. So we have some common grounds there, but we would probably part ways. And I'm not doing any bashing here, please. If any of you have a Catholic background, I'm just trying to draw a distinction of what we believe the biblical teaching, that there is a sacramental bond, but the saving grace of Christ comes through the cross of Jesus Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection, and accepting in that. And then through the covenant of marriage, we have an opportunity to display that type of grace to each other. So that's one view. We would sort of part ways a little bit and say, not quite on the same page there. But then there are two, what I believe to be really overarching views in relationship to marriage itself. And I'm going to try and write here, and I apologize ahead of time for my writing. I'm not a frustrated artist. I am a terrible artist. So there's no frustration here. I admit straight up, I'm pathetic. And those of you on the side, you can look at the screens, and hopefully you will be able to read this, all right? Many people, even unknowingly, approach marriage as a, say it with me, contract. A contract. Think about the society that we live in. It is, in essence, a contractual society, is it not? I'll go out on a limb and I'll say, I bet a number of you right now, when we're done with this service, you're going to go home and you are going to live in a dwelling place and you are under contract with the bank or a lending agency so that you can live in that dwelling home, so that you can be there. Many of you drove into church today in a vehicle that you are under contract with, that you owned the vehicle, and you drove in today on that. And if you think about it, everywhere we go in society, we really are built around a contract, are we not? If you want a cell phone, you could go down to the Sprint dealership right here and say, I would like a cell phone. And they're not going to look at you and say, you look like a pretty cool guy. You look like a nice lady. Here you go. This phone's on us. We love you. God bless. Use it and go your way. They're going to say, here's the contract. You can do it to you. You can get this data plan. They're going to start adding and adding. And then at the end, if you want it, you're going to have to do what? Sign. You're going to have to pay. Yeah. You're going to have to pay. And then you're going to have to sign on the dotted line. It's a contractual society that we live in. And so the roots of viewing marriage as a contract is really, we think that marriage is rooted in civil law. So in other words, the state issues marriage licenses, and some of you, I've performed your weddings in here, and you've brought me a marriage license. And you had to do your part and go down to the courthouse, and then after it was all said and done, I had to do my part, and then I really had to do my part and send it in, and then 30 days later, you got a marriage license, right? And so while in the time that we live in, we're required to do that, and I understand that, but for us to think that marriage is rooted in the state's authority over our marriage is to gravely mistaken the biblical teaching of what marriage truly is. It's not, in a contractual mentality, we think and say it's rooted in civil law, but we know that it's not. Now I want you to think about something here for just a moment. Think about the contracts that you may have right now. Don't answer out loud, but in your mind, why did you enter into that contract? If it's a home, if it's a car, if it was a loan for something so you could build a pool, if it was a cell phone. I mean, why did you step into a contract? Now think about contracts as a whole, just as a whole, the way they operate. And hopefully some of you are starting to get where I'm going with this. And then think if individuals have this contractual mentality and they bring it to the state of marriage. I would propose to you, and I start here in my premarital counseling. We have an initial session that lasts about 30 minutes, but then the very next section starts right here and trying to outlay to couples to understand the drastic differences I'll show you here today between these two. But in a nutshell, the contract thought process is that it's based on performance. Everything in a contract is all about performing. Each one of the parties that are in it have something that they, or some things that they have to what? Perform. They have to live up to their end of the contract. And if they don't, if you or I don't live up to our end of the contract that we're in, what happens? There's penalties, right? Lily and I entered into a contract so that we could get into a home. And that contract is very specific. And they say if you don't pay X amount of dollars by this date, then 10 days afterwards, here's how much your fees are going to be. And then 20 days afterwards, here's how much it's going to be. Miss this many payments and blah, blah, blah. That's all about a contract. Within the contract, they expect us to what? Perform the way the contract is spelled out. You think about that and bringing that thought process, even unintentionally, to the incredible institution of marriage. And people do. I ask couples all the time, what is your expectation of him in the marriage? What is your expectations of her in the marriage? Now think about this. I want to read you a quote because in a contractual approach to marriage and viewing marriage as a contract and realizing that it's sort of based upon performance, we literally set marriages up for failure. Quote, the contractual model for marriage provides an extremely weak basis for the permanence of marriage. In essence, the contractual model of marriage bases the security and stability of marriage on the ability of people not to sin. If we bring a contract mentality into the holy estate of marriage, we expect them to live up to their end of the deal, and we expect them not to sin and not to bomb and not to fail. If one spouse commits a grievous enough sin to break the contract, the other partner is free to dissolve the union. In light of humanity's, including Christians' universal sinfulness, this renders marriage a highly precarious and unstable institution. If we approach it with a contract mentality, singles, high school students, listen closely on this. Again, you are getting gold nuggets from God's Word that we're going to look at here in a moment to position you to bring to marriage a proper response, a proper attitude, and a proper approach to the holy institution of marriage. That it is not about you and it is not about performing, although we should. But the whole motivation and the basis, as we'll see in a moment, should be from a completely different arena, the contract mentality. And again, if this is rooted in civil law, and we said this last week with God as the designer being the definer, if it's a contract and the state designs marriages and can end marriages, then the state can define marriages. And there are states all across the union that are already expanding the scope and the definition of marriage. And where do you stop, would be my question. We can see when it's rooted in civil law, we set ourselves up for going into all kinds of places that the biblical teaching and the biblical data does not support in relationship to marriage. It's a contract. But here is what the Word of God teaches marriage truly is. Marriage is a covenant. Say that with me. Covenant. Marriage is truly a covenant between a man and between a woman. Now, the Bible does not provide an extensive amount of systematic teaching on marriage as a covenant. It just basically refers and calls and shows that marriage itself is a covenant. Let me just read for you real quickly just 3 passages where the Bible specifically calls and refers to marriage as a covenant. Proverbs 2:16-17, warning a young man to beware of the adulterous woman, says this: it will save you also from the adulteress, from the wayward wife with her seductive words. who has left the partner of her youth and ignored the covenant she made before God, speaking of her marriage. Ezekiel 16:8, Christ is talking to his people and comparing his relationship with them in light of a marriage. Later I passed by, when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you, covered your nakedness. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. Malachi 2:13-14. God is speaking to his people. Another thing you do, you flood the Lord's altar with tears. You weep and wail because he no longer pays attention to your offspring or accepts them with pleasure from your hands. You ask why? It is because the Lord is acting as the witness between you and the wife of your youth, because you have broken faith with her, though she is your partner, the wife of your marriage, what? Covenant. And these are just a few scriptures. God is not a contractual God. God is a God of the covenant. And we see through scriptures, and time right now won't allow me to do so, but there are multiple covenants that God makes with his people. He made a covenant with Abraham. He made a covenant with Noah. He made a covenant with Moses. He made a covenant with David. Jesus Christ himself spoke of the new covenant that he would bring, speaking of the covenant between Christ and the church in Luke chapter 22, verse 20, where he's lifting up the cup and he says, this cup, this blood is the new covenant that I'm making with you. God is not a contractual God. God is a God of the covenant. Individuals made covenants in the scriptures. One of the most precious ones we see is David and Jonathan, two guys who entered into this covenant born out of a deep, close, relational friendship. Ruth made a covenant with a lady named Naomi, and she said, I'm going to go with you and I'll follow you. Your people are going to be my people. Your God will be my God. I'm going to go with you wherever you go. You can count on me. She made a covenant with Naomi and she fulfilled it. We can see it all over the place that God is a God of the covenant, not a God of the contract. So here's what we're going to do for the remaining time. I'd like to show you the difference between the two and how dangerous, if we bring a contract mentality to our marriage, how we set ourselves up for possibly a disastrous end result, and one that God has never designed for it to happen. But if we will approach marriage as a covenant and live and breathe a covenant, singles, if you will prepare yourself to enter into a covenant with another young man or another young lady, not a contract, you will be so well positioned for success in your marriage. And by success, I mean according to God's standards, not necessarily the world's standards. So let me lob these back and forth, and let's think about this for a moment, all right? I'll get back to this performance thing here in a minute. Think of the contracts that you have entered into right now, or maybe that you're living and breathing. You entered them into for whose benefit? Whose? Yours. You better believe it. Contracts are for the benefit of self. I think I could probably extend that and say, by nature, contracts are selfish. I did not enter into a contract with the bank on my home because I said, you know what? I have thoroughly done my study, and I've looked at 10 different banks, and by far, we love you guys the most. And we love you so much that we want to give you tens of thousands of dollars in interest over the next umpteen years. It is an honor and a privilege, and we want to sign right now because we love you so much. That dude be like, what are you smoking? Who's this guy? We wanted a house. Call it what it is, right or wrong. And again, I'm not saying that this is like sin, so don't jump to that next level. I'm just saying this mentality, we enter into contracts because we want something. We stand something to gain from that contract, and so I will enter into it because I want what I want. Many people approach marriage as a contract, and they're like, I have a lot to gain in this relationship. I look at him and I look at her, and she is going to do for me and be for me what nobody else in the world. She's my soulmate. We are best friends. Oh, I cannot wait to see that. And again, that's all part of it. But if our foundation for diving into marriage is it's all about me, what happens when your spouse breaks the contract and does not fulfill your needs? What happens if they go into a funk and for 6 months they choose to ignore you? What do you do then with that contract? You look back, as most people do, and they're like, hey, you aren't meeting my needs. Well, there's only one way I can respond, because we're in a contract. If you're not living up to your end of the bargain, guess what? I'm not going to live up to my end of the bargain. So how do you like that? And we draw a line in the sand, and we say, all right, I dare you. Who's going to step first? We're in a contract. See, this thing is all about me. And I'll tell you this, say this in my marriages that I perform. When my marriage becomes about me, my marriage is in trouble. I was reviewing this and just thinking about this. I was a jerk the first couple years of our marriage. I know you find that hard to believe. By the smirks on your faces and the giggles and the... Some of you are like, you're a jerk now still. I know who you are. We're taking notes. I was selfish. Man, was I selfish in our marriage. I thought it was all about Mike Drury. And I thought, Lillian, you know, you just, come on, girl. Be patient with me. Just let me do whatever I want and be okay with it. What an igmo. That is crazy. Now, let me just say on the other side of the coin, Lillian is not perfect either, okay? And she even told me last night, don't paint me as an angel. And I said, well, I won't. You know, she had her faults too. I'm telling you, this is a direct command from my wife. You see, I've learned in 18 years, see? But I was a jerk because I was selfish in my marriage. And every time she didn't step up or live up to what I thought she should be doing, I was getting mad at her, and I was just putting up little walls. Man, I was a jerk. Why? Because I thought about marriage really as a contract. And I grew up in a good Christian home and good Christian teaching, and at 24 years old thought I was mature enough for this thing. God, thank you that I had a patient wife who didn't bolt on me and say, you really are a jerk. I don't want to be married to a jerk. Goodbye. She didn't do that. And I didn't do that to her. And so we grew in this thing together. A contract says that marriage is all about self. Singles, can I give you a word? Hey, man, singles, teenagers, you're in this state right now where you are rating your dating while waiting for mating. You understand what I'm saying? I'll say that one more time. You are in this state where you are rating your dating while waiting for mating. And so as you investigate that potential spouse right there, if that spouse and your relationship is all about them, that tells you right now what type of an approach they're going to bring to your marriage. And don't think that because you put a gold ring on their finger that all of a sudden they just poof and the frog becomes a prince. The frog is still a frog with a bunch of warts. And I'll just tell you that you see more of the warts than you saw before. If your relationship, and singles, you're in a dating relationship right now, and that guy is treating that relationship as it's all about him, man, ladies, that is a big, huge red flag, and you ought to take a couple of steps back, and you really ought to investigate where this relationship is going. Make sure you check the junk in the trunk, because I'm telling you, this is dangerous, often deadly to bring to a relationship. But in a covenant, now think about a covenant, because it's just the opposite. According to the Scriptures, a covenant is always initiated for the benefit of who? The other person. Isn't that beautiful? A covenant is always about the other person. God initiated the covenant with man not because he needed something from us. You realize by very definition of God, it states that he needs nothing. Otherwise, he could not be God. God doesn't need anything from us. And yet, he chooses to initiate covenants with us and keeps his covenants for our benefit. Jesus Christ initiated a covenant with the church not because of what he stood to gain. Eric, can you do me a favor? We were singing, it was The Stand. Can you pull up the first verse of The Stand? I was just singing it and thinking about this in light of, I know, okay, can you guys see? You stood before creation. All right, go to the next one. Next verse. All right. Now you tell me if this is a contractual approach to the relationship that we have with Jesus Christ. You, Christ, stood before my failures. Now, I'm a jerk, right, in marriage. So all of my jerky failures in my marriage, Christ stood before them. You carried the cross for my shame. The root quoted 2 Corinthians chapter 5. But he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. You stood before my failure. You carried the cross for my shame. My sin weighed upon your shoulders. My soul now to stand. Does that sound like a contract? He initiated the covenant for our benefit. And when I step into my marriage and I say, Lillian Drury, I am in this thing for you. I am going to live and breathe as long as God gives me breath in my marriage. I'm going to live and breathe not what I stand to gain, but what I can do for you. I am in this for you. And guess what? When I'm in it for her and she is in it for me, do you know what flows out of that? How could you not be happy when two people live their marriage for each other? I didn't say easy. Remember, because we get jerky sometimes. And we get rough with each other sometimes. But it's not about me. And it takes a lot of maturity to get to that point when you look at your marriage and own up and say, all right, this thing is not about me. I am in this for you. And I am in this for you. And then we live and breathe our marriages as a covenant, constantly seeking to please each other with our lives. Secondly, and I've already said this, contracts are based on performance. And I think I wrote in my notes, conditional performance, right? Because every contract has all kinds of conditions. There are all different conditions set up, and we have to meet these conditions in order to fulfill our end of the contract. And we choose to meet the conditions because the contract meets a need that we want. And again, when we bring that whole approach to marriage, get ready for major, major mess-ups, because that is such a faulty approach. In a contract, or in a covenant is based on this. Unconditional promises. Lillian, I don't care how you treat me. Lillian, I don't care what you say or do to me. Lillian, I don't care. I have made a promise to you that I am going to love you in sickness and in health, and there has been sickness and there has been health. I am going to love you in riches and in poverty, and there has been both. I am going to love you until I take my last breath. I don't care how you treat me or respond to me, because I'm in a covenant with you. I am banking on the fact that I will be in this relationship because my promise to you is unconditional. Wow, that's challenging, isn't it? Because I'll be honest with you, there's some days I don't feel like it. I feel like the contract. Hey, you know what? You're being a jerk, I'm going to be a jerk. You're treating me this way, I'm going to treat you this way. You don't deserve unconditional love, but think about this for a moment. God's love is never fickle. We never wake up in the morning and say, I wonder how he's going to treat me today. Do you ever wake up like that? Are you in that relationship right now and you wake up every day and you're like, wow, this is going to be a ride because I don't know how he or she is going to be towards me today. Is today a good day or is today a bad day? How's their love? How's their treatment of me today? In a covenant, we say, I make an unconditional promise to you. She makes an unconditional promise to me. Christ has promised to love me. Now, because of that, I will certainly want to respond properly. But my motivation for that is born out of the covenant that he made with me, not because I feel like I have a contractual obligation to perform the way that God needs me to perform for him. Does that make sense to you? There's a stark difference between the two. Unconditional promises. When Ruth said to Naomi, hey, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Unless I really don't like the place, because if I don't like the place, then I'm going to come home. And your people are going to be my people. Unless your people really hack me off and I don't get along with them, then I'm going to come back to my people. And your God will be my God. Unless following your God is really difficult and really hard, then I'm going to go back to my gods because I know what's going on there. She didn't say that. It was an unconditional promise. I'm going, your people, your God, I'm embracing it. It's an unconditional promise. And I would say to you that for some of us, perhaps even right now where you are, this is really stretching your marriage because you want to revert to the contract and your spouse isn't performing right now the way you think they should. They've let you down. They've hurt you. They're straying from the Lord. There's marital drift going on. Your children have become little kid CEOs, and you're sort of revolving your life around the children, and your life is going this way, and her life is going that way. And you think, man, she's just not performing, and so I'm just not going to perform anymore. And maybe right now God is speaking the truth to your heart that says, look, you stepped into a covenant, not a contract, and you promised before God and before man that you're going to love that woman, you're going to love that man, regardless of how they respond to you. And God is saying to you right now, fulfill your promise to them regardless of how they're treating you. Regardless of where they are right now. And they may have chosen not to even be with you in church today. But hear the word of the Lord that God desires you to be to that person what he is to you. And maybe in your being Jesus to them, it will lovingly draw them back to him. A covenant versus a contract. This next one here is close to the first one, but we have contractual obligations. We are obligated by the contract, and so our motivation, because it was born out of self, we are obligated to perform in such a way because it's about getting what we want. That's the contract mentality. However, and think about this for a moment. We pretty much can make contracts with anyone, can't we? And we will. I mean, people we don't even know. Again, to use the analogy of our home, I didn't sit down with the people from the bank and say, we're good friends. Before we sign this contract, I'd like us to spend 6 months sort of really spending some quality time together because before we enter into contract with anybody, we really want to feel tight with them. I said, hey, you got what we want. We're ready to give up what you need. Let's sign on the dotted line. Let's do it. That's how we enter into contracts. But a covenant, totally different. Totally different. Here's what covenants are based on. Man, don't miss this. According to God's Word, when we look at a covenant, covenants are based on steadfast love. I really only enter into a covenant with somebody that I love. And then I love deeply. And then I care for deeply. The Hebrew word for this is chesed. I like to say that because you get to go and you can sort of clear your throat. If I hit any of you guys with a loogie, I apologize ahead of time. Say it with me. Chesed. One more time. Chesed. Can we get some wipes for the chairs in between services, please? Now here's what I had to do a paper on this in one of my master's classes, and it was unbelievable what God revealed to me through this. But here's what I pulled from that. That word really means loving kindness. Let me say that one more time. God's covenant with us, based on chesed, is based on his loving kindness. In a covenant, the way I relate to the other person is not by contractual obligations to perform so that I can get what I want. I treat them unconditionally with loving kindness. Now think about that for a moment and how we relate to our spouses. Loving kindness. Lamentations 3:22-23. This is just one verse of hundreds that use this word. Reading from the New American, I think it gives it the best interpretation for this particular thought. The Lord's loving kindness indeed never ceases. His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Can I just tell you that in a covenant relationship, this steadfast love, this chesed, is not a romantic, ooh, hooked on a feeling. That's not what this is about. And I would propose to you that if your marriage is built around, ooh, hooked on a feeling, romantic feeling, your marriage, just give it some time. Have some kids, go through some difficulties, just live. You're not going to have that romantic feeling to sustain you. Now, you can keep the fires burning. You can do your part. Guys, some of you have been slackers. Your wife is just waiting you to show you got a 1 inch of romanticness, is that a word, in your bones. So you can do that. But in a covenant, no, this is a different type of love. This is a loving kindness. This is, now watch this, what the New Testament word is agape. It is a love of the mind. I am choosing to love you and to extend to you loving kindness regardless of how I feel and regardless of how you treat me. Whoa! Totally different than a contractual love. That's the loving kindness. Now with that thought, just let me give you 2 thoughts in this, because this was born out of personal experience in counseling with couples, having people come talk with me, and just things that my wife and I have witnessed and observed. First of all, steadfast love, please, refuses to focus on the negative aspects of one spouse. Steadfast love refuses. It doesn't mean that we totally ignore. And if there are things that need to be corrected, then obviously God comes to us in our love when we stray, and He brings us back to Him. He corrects us. He disciplines us. That's all part of His love. It's all part of His steadfast love. But I've experienced that when couples start to get in trouble, what they really do is they zero in on the negative parts of their spouse, and they can't get beyond them. And they'll say things like this, and I know I've got my faults, but man, you should see what she does. And then they spend 25, 30 minutes telling me what she does. Or she says, and I've contributed to my part in the marriage too, but, oh my goodness, you should hear what he says to me, or you should see what and then they spend all their time. What they do is they become focused and zeroed in on the negative aspects of their spouse. That's not how steadfast love treats the other person. Secondly, steadfast love refuses to intentionally hurt the object of our love. I'm going to say that one more time, especially to the younger generation, because I have witnessed with my own ears the way young marrieds talk to each other, and it is sickening. Steadfast love refuses to intentionally hurt the object of our love. What they do is they guard their words and their tongue even in the most heated of arguments. And I have sat down with couples, I have watched with my own eyes, I have had individuals sit down and say, you won't believe. More often than not only, but more often than not, it's the ladies saying what the men have called them and how he has spoken to them. Steadfast love says, I will not go there. I don't care how angry I am with you. I will not intentionally look to hurt you with my words. We do that, don't we? Listen to Colossians 3:19. Guys, check this out. Colossians 3:19. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Remember, you are literally being Jesus to your spouse, and Jesus would never call us some of the things that you call your wife. If you've done that, I lovingly say to you, you need to hit your knees today, and you need to look your wife in the eyes when we get out of here, and you need to say, I am sorry. I have not shown you steadfast love. I have been selfish and a contractual love, and steadfast love would never say some of the things to you and call you some of the names that I have called you. God help me and God forgive me. I want our marriage to be a covenant, not a contract. And maybe some of you wives need to do the same thing to your husband. Singles, if that guy talks to you and treats you like dirt, or guys, that girl treats you and talks to you in a disparaging way, calls you names, they are so far from being ready to enter into a covenant and love you with steadfast love. Man, you need to just totally slam the brakes on and evaluate that relationship right here and now. Steadfast love refuses to go there. I mean, it gets heated, doesn't it? I mean, and it happens when we get in the heat of that moment. You just like want to. I was just reading this week about this, and I read about a couple. They got into this fight. It was crazy. They got into this fight, and the guy said something, as a lot of guys do, he shouldn't have. And he looked at her, and he just said, I don't understand how you can be so beautiful and so stupid at the same time. Exactly, that's what I said. And she said, allow me to explain. God created me so beautiful so that you would love me. God created me so stupid so that I would love you. Be careful. Be very careful, my friends, who you choose to spar with. Guys, she's probably one up on you. Let's live in steadfast love. All right, let me wrap this up. I appreciate your patience with me here, but this is just name-calling, personal attacks. It's just not found in a covenant. It's just not found. And yet it's found in so many marriages today of those who claim to follow Christ. I think there's some confession today in the house that would probably need to be made in that vein. And some of you need to let go of your pride, let go of your arrogance, and let go of their negative aspects and look at you and say, do I need to confess to my spouse today that I've not shown them steadfast love? Finally, and I'll wrap up with this, contracts are made to be broken, aren't they? The people at the bank didn't say, Drury, hey, 15-year, 30-year, forget that. Take a lifetime. It's just pay it back as you get the chance, man. We love you guys. No, they said, here's your choices. Boom, boom, boom. You can pay it back in this amount. You can pay it back here. Because a contract is made to be broken. They're temporary. They're supposed to end. A covenant, according to Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, and according to Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 19, verses 4 through 6, a covenant is designed to be permanent. And I would propose to you that the marriage covenant, by God's design, is one of permanency for a lifetime. We're not married in heaven, by the way. I will tell you that. You can read Matthew chapter 22 and see Jesus' teaching on that. We don't continue our marriages in the afterlife. Jesus said we will be just like the angels in heaven. We will not give and marry, nor will we be married. But our covenant is to last and to be permanent for a lifetime. Why? Because there's security in that. There's not security in a contract, because you know the end date's coming. In a covenant, there is plenty of security. Now let me wrap up, because I think some of us need to ask our spouses these questions. If you dare. You may want to write these down, and I'm challenging you today when you get home to maybe, if you really, really want to hear from your spouse, ask them these questions or something like this, and then don't give up 1 ounce of defense. Excuses, just let them answer, and then say, I'll commit to doing what you share with me. Number 1, look at your spouse and say, how can I help you and make life easier for you? That's simple. They're going to get harder. How can I help you and make life easier for you? Number 2, look at them and say, what am I not doing that you need me to do? What am I not doing that you need me to do? It may be something simple, and it may be something profound. You can also take the flip side of that and say, what am I doing that I need to stop doing? What am I doing that, according to you, I need to stop doing? And then finally, how can I be a more godly husband or wife for you? And then just let them answer. And then say, I'll commit to doing and being that for you, because I'm in a covenant with you. Singles, you need to bring this approach to your relationships. I know when you're dating, you're not in a covenant yet, but you are preparing to enter into that covenant. And if your relationship looks a heck of a lot more like a contract than the potential of a covenant, you need to be very, very careful about that relationship and take your time and follow the street sign that says proceed with caution. Or maybe even you need to stop altogether. I don't know. All right? Let's